Hello everyone. This is Ankit.Sharma and you are watching Bharat EV Talks, a podcast series by All India EV. In this fifth episode, we have Mr. Sheetanshu from EMO.Energy. Now, EMO.Energy is well known for its innovation in the battery technology for the Indian EV market. So we'll get to know more about the company and more about the country and the technology they are bringing on the table in the podcast. Thank you, Sheetanshu, for this. Giving your time to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Ankit. No, my pleasure joining.
So, can we get start with the very first question that is your journey of starting EMO and of course how you met your founders and build this founding team because at the end of the day for any tech company the founding team is the most important factor. I mean, can you tell us take us through the entire journey?
Absolutely. I think you've touched upon the first point to start, which is very correct, is the founding team is very critical to start. And we've always felt that there is a need and a lack of technology companies in India. There's two founders for this company, me and Rahul. And both of us actually have been in this space and in the EV tech sector for over 10 years individually. Rahul for 8 years longer than I have.
Mhm.
And the reality today is that if you take most tech companies, even in India, there has been traditionally a lot of what I call import of technology. There's been a lot of JVs, there's been a lot of understanding of what's been happening in different countries for different segments, and then kind of bringing that to India. Now, this has changed a lot in the last 10, 15 years since a lot of the two-wheeler segments have gone away from the Japanese companies. A lot of the European companies have started breaking up their JVs, and now Indian companies are finally becoming independent, right?
That's
But if you had to put this as a global segment, as a global map, there still is no Bosch from India. There is still no Continental from India. Those
true.
hardcore research and technology focused companies is something Rahul and I really connected on when we first met. So, just to maybe recap a little bit, I personally have been in this segment for quite some time, worked at a bunch of companies, and Ola Electric is where I met Rahul Patel, and Rahul Patel also had been at a few companies before that. And both of us actually spent almost all of our time together at Ola when we actually started working there. And
Mhm.
the reality was that the way we thought of how technology has to kind of improve not just this segment and not just the overall problems that we might see in the EV segment, but also the entire face of Indian technology, the face of what Indian engineering can do. That really was the driving factor when both of us started. Both of us have been responsible for a lot of the really key engineering projects at the companies we've been at. So we've been through the dirt, we've been through the entire grime of actually building systems from scratch and have had the good fortune of doing it for larger companies in India and the US. So both of us have spent a lot of time back and forth. And there is a lot of understanding from the ground level for both of us to take this all the way from concept to production. And
Of
that's very
course.
critical because there's a lot of conceptual things that might happen, and there's a lot of I'd say, non-innovative production things that might happen. How do you
Mhm.
link those two to really combine and build out something more innovative from this country for the world is
Mhm.
and will always be the entire foundation of this company. And we will do different things. We might build battery packs, we'll do software, we'll do a whole range of things maybe in the future, but it will always be research and technology focused, and it will always be a first principle approach to whatever problem we're solving. Might it be in mobility or storage or new forms of energy?
Mhm.
It's definitely the approach to figure out what is sustainable and affordable for India and for the developing world in general, and not
Mhm.
just take what might just exist in some country and kind of copy paste it for a certain application here.
Sure.
So we now are almost 37 people, but the foundation again, Rahul and me and a few people in the founding team have been doing this for almost 10 years. Ather, Ola, Log9, some of the other EV companies in India have a lot of experience from there and really been able to hone and develop a lot of the talent in the last 2 years that exists in our company with
Mhm.
to be at the point where I at least feel it's definitely one of the foremost teams, at least in the segment.
So, in the market, EMO is well known for the innovation and the tech behind the battery, and you guys are bringing on the table. And recently, you have your own patented active thermal management and AI-based BMS. I mean, can you tell us about the same and how you thought? I mean, this is the important. Of course, we know why BMS is important and active thermal management is very much important in the batteries. But of course, when we talk about the two-wheeler batteries and the three-wheeler batteries, there is a very difference that three-wheeler batteries have space for active thermal management, be it phase changing material, or people are also exploring the liquid cooling. But in the two-wheeler batteries, the space is very limited for that particular thing. So how you're seeing this, and what's your active thermal management, and what is your AI based BMS which you have patented?
Perfect. So I'll start with the thermal management part of it because that becomes a critical in construction of the entire battery pack. So today, most limitations for a battery system are always going to be from how much heat and how much current I can draw from my cell. Now, there is always going to be a chemistry limitation, and that might be something a cell company might recommend to you. But even within those limits, and maybe slightly beyond those limits, if you are to stretch, let's say, as a battery pack company,
Mhm.
there is the intent of now figuring out how much heat do I have to keep taking out from the cell, and how do I
Mhm.
maintain the right temperature, and how do I maintain the right current profile to really make sure that the amount of lithium plating, dendrite formation, and the entire kind of SEI formation that I'm seeing is
Mhm.
absolutely limited as much as I can. So that's the start point for us. Now, you're absolutely right in saying that in a two-wheeler system, you really don't have the liberty or the luxury of, let's say, using even larger radiators or HVAC
Of course.
systems or anything like
Yeah.
that, right? So it's very critical to basically be in a specific domain, a specific size. Maybe that's the floorboard of your vehicle, or maybe that's a small space under your seat. And
Mhm.
within that, figuring out what is the most optimal management that you can figure out.
Mhm.
One of the start points for us that was also very clear was that this had to be independent and had to be used with, let's say, any standardized chargers. So
Mhm.
we had to basically be able to kind of compensate and control everything within the battery. So whatever compromises we make from an engineering perspective have to be within a certain volume. So the first thing we did was we went and measured at least 10, 15 scooters, let's say in the fleet segment, and found out the smallest battery space that they were using. So there is a slight cubish space that you have, and within that you have to essentially fit everything. And the reality was for us, within that space, we were able to now
Just
figure
a
out
minute, I
an entire
guess.
liquid thermal management system, which basically is able to kind of circulate your fluid a very specific way. It basically starts with the pumps at the bottom. We have our own
Mhm.
well-designed kind of own engineered pumps, and it's forcing
Mhm.
fluid in a very specific manner, therefore taking
Mhm.
all the heat from the cells and now rejecting it to your outside enclosure. Now,
Mhm.
our entire exteriors are basically designed to the entire surface area of a radiator, and now we have an
Mhm.
entire airflow system around it to keep conducting heat away from that. So there's a two-phase system here where you're conducting
Okay.
heat from your cells to your aluminum through fluids, and then you're
Mhm.
conducting that away through air. This
Of course.
loop for us is the absolute most optimal you can get at today. Now, we've compared this against phase change materials, we've compared this against spotting compounds, we've even
Mhm.
compared this against other liquid cooling systems. And the reality is that any kind of water based liquid glycol kind of system that you might, let's say, serpentine or bottom
Mhm.
plate away is still
Mhm.
going to have limitations. So now for
Mhm.
us, we're literally taking heat from every side of the cell. We have our own chemistry on the coolant side. We have
Mhm.
our own sensors to measure literally every single cell's temperature. And we
Okay.
have four instead of just one pump to basically be able to selectively do, I'd say, what I call liquid cooling or heating, like
Mhm.
excessive liquid cooling or heating. So we can go all the way till 20 liters per minute for certain sections and really go very strong on flow to where we're almost within a few degrees of ambient. And that really depends on the condition and the start point. But the reality is that for us, in any ambient scenario now, we're able to essentially still do the kind of fast charging that we're promising. So the
Mhm.
fluid itself, the circulation method for it within the battery, the fact that we
Mhm.
can conduct so much heat away from the cells is really the
Mhm.
start point for us. And the
Of course.
second thing is, as you mentioned, is basically the BMS. And
Of
the
course.
BMS is more than just the board, it's the entire control system we're essentially putting into the battery, right? So
That's
we've
right.
actually been able to figure out our own sensors from scratch. So we've
Okay.
actually been able to develop our own, let's say, our temperature sensors, and they're a little different from, I'd say, what we call standard NTCs.
Mhm.
They're essentially actually like a piezoelectric based sheet which we mount across all our cells,
Okay.
and therefore actually measuring temperature across every single cell. Now
Mhm.
you're able to really see the temperature pro map of an entire battery pack. You're able to see resistance because we have actually individual kind of voltage sensors for each cell. And
Mhm.
then collating all this information into the BMS is very critical. So when I say AI, or when all of us as a company are basically saying AI, Now, the second layer to what we're doing, and this is very critical because we now have a machine learning model which is basically taking a lot of this voltage, a lot of this current and temperature data to basically do predictive maintenance and predictive health, essentially. So
Of course.
we've basically been training our models for a year and a half with all of our data, with a lot of data from other companies, to
Mhm.
basically start understanding patterns for drivers. So if you have, let's say, a Swiggy application or a big basket application, or you might have, let's say, a different delivery application, or even, let's say, B2C application,
Mhm.
even within these, riders should technically in the future be paying different rentals. They should
Of
have
course.
different insurance values. They should have different, uh, let's say, kilometers they're sanctioned for based on a certain lease amount.
Mhm.
And based on the area in the country you are, that should change because your temperatures will influence certain range and certain health. That model for us is very critical. And that's where the AI element of the BMS comes in. So we are probably using the largest microcontroller in the world. We're using the absolute largest computing system we can for our BMS systems today to basically analyze this software. So every cell's data is being considered into a model. We are using all of our health, all of our aging data for all of our cells and the packs in the past, collating this information, running it through a machine learning model, and now understanding and really on a very granular level predicting what kind of a rider this is and what their future will look like based on certain conditions. So this then allows us to work with financing companies and insurance companies to become this underwriting model for the future where we are genuinely the financing platform for battery packs. So
Of
that's
course.
where the element for the AI BMS comes in.
Of course, I totally understand because in terms of electric vehicles, either it's a very simple product with a battery motor controller, or it's a tech-heavy platform, which you are doing and a lot of other companies are doing. And of course, the data points are the key to this EV ecosystem. I mean the data points which are coming from the rider's point of view, or how battery is performing at a certain place. Let's just say in Delhi NCR, how the battery is performing at a different interval of time. All those data points can help us to enhance the entire evo's EV ecosystem. And then companies like EMO is doing great job in the same, and it's really great to see what you guys are doing. And as a tech company, you guys are as a tech enthusiast and the tech people, it's always like what next we can do. It's always in the mind of the tech
Right.
people, and it would also be in the mind of you as well. So can you let us know, I mean, apart from these battery which you have already present in the market, what are the next new things which we can expect from EMO down the line, maybe this year or next year, or maybe down the line 5 years? What you guys are planning, if you can share.
Absolutely. So, as a company in the next, let's say, horizon 2 to 5 years, there's three things we're going to be focusing on. One is our mobility, the Zen pack, and the Zen rig that we're developing. Essentially, is going to scale across multiple segments now. So we have the two-wheeler battery packs for scaling. There's multiple other two-wheelers in the market that are going to start using variations of that for their own particular vehicles. Larger vehicles, even if they're not very large voltages, maybe till 100 volts, we're doing for tractors, we're doing for other four-wheelers also. So that's going to be very large for us because there is a lot of electrification in a lot of high power segments for
Hmm.
construction, agri, machinery. And that's where really all of our, let's say, innovations on thermal management also stand out because anything in a commercial utility setting is basically going to really value this a lot more than a B2C customer might today. So
Sure.
that's a big thing for us, and that is actually a lot of customers and a lot of clients we do have in space and in place for the next 2 to 5 years. The
Mhm.
second thing, though, that is going to be huge is that all of this understanding that we have in mobility and all this low cost and let's say high tech kind of engineering we've done to figure out one standardized module is now going to start applying in energy storage. So we already have a lot of work we've been able to do all the way up from 10 kVA to a 1 MVA kind of solution to basically be able to do different versions of the same stack and then basically parallel them all together. So that is
Mhm.
going to be a very large part of the business because India today is at the precipice of really being able to go electric, right? Like we don't have some of the geopolitical issues or some of the mental blocks that some of the other countries might have. As
Mhm.
a country, we are also extremely reliant on fuel and it is extremely expensive. So it's important that the alternate energy segment now starts switching to batteries because the cost makes sense now. So
Sure.
the entire energy trading segment is the entire battery health management along with that is very critical for us. And the last thing is what that segues into is the entire software stack. For us
mm,
today, we're just starting off. We're basically implementing batteries in mobility, then we'll implement in storage. But all this while, we will have our own software model gathering more and more data and basically building more and more larger and more complex decisions. This then also becomes something we will be scaling as an independent software solution for a lot of other OEMs, because
mm,
the intent is that once you start having a genuine second life market, once you start having a genuine second use kind of vehicle for cars, like a used car market,
mm.
there the value of the EV is only and only going to matter on battery financing
Of
and how exactly is degraded. And that understanding, we believe, requires so much data and it requires so much different expertise on the battery system itself, that a
mhm,
company like ours, which is putting in the years and putting in the number of resources that we are for this specific problem, is
mm,
going to be the right solution. So these three elements will go on scaling. There will be a lot of services attached to the software also, because it becomes its own kind of entity going forward. But we are solely focused on now figuring out how do we essentially scale battery systems to where you have the right power, the right energy, and the right cost, really going out to exactly applications which companies are looking for.
of course, of course. Um, as a as a media platform, we as on India we scan a lot of things, what is happening globally, what new things are happening. And I'm sure you as a tech enthusiast also would be scanning a lot of things. A lot of things would be coming in front of you which you will feel like, okay, this is interesting, this is something. It doesn't have to be from the EV market, it can be from other market as well. But when you talk about technology, it really excites us. So can you share some of the things which you came across in last couple of months and you feel like, okay, this is something interesting?
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple of things on the energy and on the EV side. We are also, as a company, and I'm personally looking forward to. I think one is definitely long energy storage, right? So there's a lot of chemical companies which are figuring out large systems that you mix together to basically give you long energy storage. Now that's obviously completely different from batteries, but there is a limitation to where batteries can solve in terms of number of hours compared to, let's say, like a diesel generator. So 4 to 6 hours does seem like a normal amount of time to build a, I'd say, cost competitive battery system. But beyond that, if we still want to get rid of diesel, there is a lot of long energy storage we are kind of just monitoring as a company. It's not like we're actively doing anything. But yeah, I think that's a big one. And on the other side, we're also just looking at a lot of the alternate cell chemistries that will be coming up. It's
Mm,
very critical for us as a company to be at the absolute forefront of what is happening there, right? So there's today, let's say from a cell perspective, we're quite excited, let's say, on the 4680 platform or even the BYD Blade platform, right? And that's becoming other companies' Blade platform now.
of course.
So those two chemistries really scaling into India is very critical because that hasn't really happened yet. And alterations of the anode side is going to be very critical now, because there is going to be a lot of work on LFP to basically match the energy densities that you're seeing for NMC. But
Mm,
there's also a tremendous amount of work to improve NCA and NMC to where you're using silicon anodes doped with different materials to
mm,
push to like 500 watt hour per kg. So it's quite exciting to see that in the next two, if not hopefully within like at least 5 years, we should be at the point where all of these problems that we talk about, that okay,
mm,
the range isn't enough, the life cycle isn't enough, the safety isn't enough, from a chemistry plus a system integration perspective, which is where we come in, are going to be the final solution for some of these segments, right? There is a lot of gestation, a lot of innovation that's happened in the last 10 years, but we are, at least I believe, in the next 5 years at the point where this is going to start settling into what is going to be a stabilized, scalable
mm.
final system, essentially.
Of course, of course. I was speaking to one of a battery manufacturer, and they were all. I mean, the topic of conversation was more towards the standardization of battery design for expanding the market, expanding the horizon of EV industry. Because as you also know that EV industry still is limited to the delivery business, logistic business. The personalized
Right.
adoption of electric two-wheelers specifically has not cracked the market yet, and the raise anxiety is one of the biggest thing. I mean, if there is some sort of standardization battery design across multiple companies, that can help a lot. I mean, I can switch my battery from X company to any other X plus one company battery because that will support my EV. And that friend told me, yeah, there's certain part which is required for the standardization, but of course it cannot be subjected as a whole business, because it will impact the battery manufacturing companies. Their innovation will get limited, their what their R&D is they are doing, that will get limited. But of course, let's just say 40% of their business should be towards standardization, and next 60% towards the new innovation and new R&D which you guys are doing. How do you see this?
I think there's two sides to this, and the hard part is really convincing the really large OEMs to adopt this, right? And there's multiple reasons why, if you let's say take the top five OEMs, have completely unique systems. They're not even like interreplaceable from size or connector or anything, like even kilowatt hour power, nothing. There is no replaceability within them.
Hmm.
The good and bad part of where we are as a world, let's say in 2024, is everybody really likes customization. Everybody likes their own type of scooter. Everybody likes their own type of car.
Yes.
Designs are changing. Different products within the same segment, the company sells seven different versions of the same thing. The
Hmm.
problem is if you standardize even one component within all of these, if you are
Hmm.
fixing, let's say, such a giant box within some place of the vehicle, which today is already happening, like a lot of the, I'd say, long tail OEMs, a lot of even the mid tier OEMs are within the same size of battery, that it already is kind of happening. But if you're saying that that is now the global or at least the national standard for all two wheelers, it is impossible for me to imagine a motorcycle. It is
Hmm.
impossible for me to imagine like a sleek, good looking scooter now. There is so much you've restricted in terms of packaging for an OEM
Hmm.
that even forget all of the, let's say, actual issues with standardization. From an entire product perspective, I'm very limited now. I can't give a big boot space. I can't give these features because now you've told me that, okay, I'm limited in this regard. So it's not
Yeah.
even about innovation so much. It's about the fact that if this was, let's say, 20 years back, and there are only two, three types of scooters, there's a Chetak and there's a couple of other scooters, totally possible. It could have happened already. But there's at least 40, 50 scooters in the market. There's 200 EV OEMs. There's like an endless list, right? For
Hmm.
all of us to now sit and agree that we're going to use the largest component, the same size, the same connector,
Hmm.
basically means the same power, the same
Awesome.
energy, it's impossible. Like, I think there might be certain parts of this segment where you might be able to standardize it. And I think that will come specifically from the private segment. That's
Of
not
course.
going to come from the government. And that's essentially what's going to happen. And I don't know yet, but I personally feel like is that two or three companies will basically take over the segment and they will be the standard. There won't be one standard, there might be two, there might be three. So
Of
there
course.
might be, let's say, one or two fast charging standards, there might be one or two swapping standards, and those standards are essentially just companies and
Of
they
course.
have their own standard within them. So I personally don't think the government is going to be able to standardize this because I also know that they've tried so much. Like they've tried a lot. Like this has been a
Battery swapping
conversation
is
for
not
five
happening.
years.
Yeah, battery
Yeah,
swapping
right. Like,
policy has not yet finalized. It's been more than 3 years
yeah,
now, and we are
yeah,
seeing at
man.
what's happening. Uh, as, from 2000, the early 20s, the 2000 to at least 2015 or 2016, the Indian market was more towards software-based, service-based industry. That's why the initial, at that time, the engineers which were coming up, they were not able to have so much option as a tech developer. 90 to 95% the options were limited to software. And of course, because of that, we become a late starter in EV as well. I mean, talk about BLDC motors. We didn't had the number of BLDC motor manufacturer back in 2017, even when the gadget notification came. And that's because, and what happened when 2021, 2020, post COVID, the EV market gained momentum. We were importing a lot of motors from China itself. The tech was imported from there. Now the thing is changing. Now the companies are coming up with their tech and innovation. The hardware sector, the tech sector, hardware sector is gaining momentum. So now if a person is looking to explore, and maybe there is a student in second year or third year of their engineering or their science, and they are wanted to venture into the same, they want to get into the hardcore engineering sector, be it mechanical, be it electrical or electronics. What sort of suggestion you would like to give to them? What are the things they need to understand? What are the things they need to focus on to it?
That's a great question. I'd say like you mentioned, there's a lot of companies in the early 2010s that started up in India. Um, Ather is obviously a big one in the EV segment. They were one of the first people to raise some money, and at least for specifically the electric vehicle segment, were one of the first true startups, right? And there's been a lot of companies since. There's been a lot of work happening since, and the robotics side, the space side, the EV side, just everything, right? Like the tech segment in general is booming. And it's important that we realize that this happens only because certain people wanted to make this happen. It's not like the
Mm.
whole country one day decided that yes, all of us are going to be a deep tech segment. No, it's just certain people really wanted to do this, and they just kept doing this, just in spite of maybe there's a giant amount of failure. And anybody who is in second or third year of college, I'd say the only big recommendation I have is just keep learning whatever you can. There's a lot of projects you can work on outside of class. If you don't like class, study in class. There's a lot of things to understand. The world is changing pretty rapidly, especially with a lot of the modern software solutions that we have. But it's very critical to realize that world will still need stuff made, right? Like there's still things around us that we'll need, and all of that is also getting a lot more complex. So
Of
as
course.
a country, if we really need to be pushing ourselves to where, let's say, China is, right? Like you mentioned that obviously we were buying BLDCs from China for a long time,
Mm.
and we still are, and there is really very difficult reasons to not buy them, right? Like they're extremely cheap, they work well, they're reliable, they have thousands of spare parts, they're all standardized within their country. It's hard to replicate that whole ecosystem as a country today, but it'll only happen if certain people all across this country just stand up and say that we need to do this. And that's already happening. I think a lot of people are waking up to this, and the reality is that that's the only way this happens. And
Of course.
a lot of us basically need to start just doing a lot of different kind of innovation around how we're thinking of things, right? Instead of just being like, oh, okay, this happened for Tesla or this happened for so and so vehicle, we'll just do exactly the same thing. It might not work at all. Like it might not work in any scenario for our country, right? Like that really is going to be very critical. So we genuinely have a giant opportunity in some of these segments, even as a global segment, because the world and the, let's say, the tailwinds are in favor of India to even export to a lot of these, like let's say, southern economies, because there isn't really a lot of the Japanese work happening in the EV segment. Only China really has a strong foothold, and they have their own complications. So yeah, it's very critical that we, in the next 5, 10 years, really rise up to this occasion, right? Because it genuinely is a pretty large opportunity as a segment.
Yes, of course. So, towards the end, the most important question as a battery manufacturer, I would like to ask what your expectations from the upcoming Fame 3, Fame 4. What's your expectations?
Right. So I'd say it's not just straight up subsidy that I think I am very interested in. I feel like there is a lot of support at each stage that is required to set up a business in India, right? So if you keep comparing, let's say, to a very close neighbor of ours, China, a lot of their factories today, certain parts of it are just completely funded by the government. Like
Mm.
they might not have certain parts of their whole company on their own company's payroll because it's on the government's books.
Mm.
Now, I'm not saying that we start like a whole subsidy system for all our factories, but at least at certain stages, if it becomes a lot more favorable to set up a business, if a business is doing well, support them with certain funds at the right amount of time, not really become like a venture capital firm by any means, but try to essentially pick up companies that they think might actually scale to different
Mm.
places, is going to be huge, I think. Like for us to now be able to replicate the entire growth of China, manufacturing is huge. And the world is again looking at us for manufacturing. So the entire amount of support in land, the shed, the people, the ability to get that many people in that space, the ecosystem around a factory, because a factory is a city, right? Like if it's set up really large enough.
Mm.
So all of those to really push and make it as quick and as fast as possible is really going to be very critical, because in the next 5 years we should be setting up gigawatt hours of battery tech, of battery like cells, of everything, right? And yeah, that will only happen if there is a lot of openness from the government to just kind of close their eyes and move on this topic. And because if you get stuck in a lot of the smaller negotiations, they'll go on for years, and that's where we essentially will start losing out on some of this.
So this was a great insight from your side, from the technology point of view, from the market point of view, and how Indian market is evolving. Thank you for sharing all this information, and we would look forward to a lot more innovative products for the Indian market and for the global market from your side. Thank you for giving your time, Mr. Shivansh.
Thank you so much, Ankit. It was great talking to you. Stay in touch. Have a good day.